Imagine waking up on a beautiful Saturday morning, getting ready for the biggest holiday of the year, and then, in just 6 minutes, your entire world, literally, falls apart. Then, just when you think it's over, the ocean decides to join the party. And if that wasn't enough, the whole city catches fire. This isn't a movie. This is exactly what happened to Lisbon, Portugal on November 1st, 1755. And what happened next would literally change the course of human history. Let's rewind to 1755. Lisbon wasn't just any city. It was the city. We're talking about one of the richest, most glamorous capitals in all of Europe. Picture this: gold literally pouring in from Brazil, diamonds sparkling on church curtains, and an opera house so extravagant it could fit 600 people with room for 25 horses on stage. Yes, horses. Inside. Because when you're that rich, why not? The city sat beautifully on the banks of the Tagus River with about 275,000 people calling it home. That's roughly 10% of Portugal's entire population packed into one glittering jewel of a city. The royal palace? Stunning. The libraries, filled with priceless manuscripts documenting the adventures of explorers like Vasco da Gama. The churches, covered in gold, silver, and enough precious metals to make a modern-day rapper jealous. But here's where our story takes a turn. November 1st, 1755 was All Saints' Day, one of the most important holidays in Catholic Portugal. And the Portuguese weren't just casually religious, they were seriously devout. So on this particular Saturday morning, pretty much everyone had packed into Lisbon's 40 magnificent churches. Every single candle was lit. Every church was decorated with flowers and fabric decorations. The mood was festive, holy, and peaceful. King Joseph I had actually dodged the city that morning. His daughters wanted to spend the holiday at their beach house, basically the 18th century equivalent of, "Dad, can we please go to the beach instead of church?" And for once, Dad said yes. Remember this detail. It's going to matter. Meanwhile, about 200 to 320 kilometers southwest of Lisbon, deep beneath the Atlantic Ocean, something was stirring. The African, Eurasian, and American tectonic plates, 3 massive slabs of Earth's crust, were having what we might call a really bad day at the office. They'd been pushing against each other for centuries, building up tension like a rubber band stretched way too tight. The time was 9:40 a.m. Churches were full, candles were flickering, servants were home preparing elaborate holiday feasts. People were praying, singing, celebrating. Everything was perfect. And then the earth moved, not romantically, violently. The first shock hit without warning. Buildings started swaying. Church bells, all of them, began ringing in unison, but nobody was pulling the ropes. People heard what witnesses described as a horrible subterranean noise, like the earth itself was screaming. Then the real shaking started. For 3.5 to 6 minutes, which might not sound like long until you realize that's an eternity when the ground is literally trying to kill you. Lisbon shook like a snow globe in the hands of an angry toddler. We're not talking about a little wobble. This was a magnitude 8.5 to 9.0 earthquake. Massive fissures, cracks in the ground 5 meters wide, tore through the city center. That's wide enough to swallow a car. Buildings didn't just crack, they pancaked. And remember all those people in churches? Those medieval buildings, designed centuries ago with absolutely zero earthquake engineering, collapsed like houses of cards. Roofs came crashing down, walls imploded. Thousands of people were crushed instantly, buried under tons of stone and timber while they were literally in the middle of praying. The royal palace? Destroyed. The brand new Phoenix Opera House, ironically named, opened just 6 months earlier, reduced to rubble. That 70,000-volume royal library with irreplaceable paintings and historical documents? Gone. But here's the thing. The earthquake was just the opening act. So picture this. You've just survived the worst 6 minutes of your life. Your city is in ruins. Buildings are collapsed everywhere, people are screaming, and you're covered in dust, but somehow still alive. Your first instinct? Get to open space. Get away from falling buildings. Makes sense, right? Thousands of survivors thought exactly the same thing. They fled toward the docks, the wide-open waterfront where nothing could fall on them. Safety at last. The Tagus River had always been Lisbon's lifeline, bringing in ships loaded with treasures from around the world. Surely the water would be safe. And then something weird happened. The sea started leaving. The water in the harbor began receding, pulling back like someone was draining a massive bathtub. Within minutes, the harbor floor was exposed, something nobody had ever seen before. And lying there on the muddy riverbed were shipwrecks, cargo vessels, treasure ships that had sunk over the years, their contents glittering in the morning sun. Gold, silver, diamonds, just sitting there, free for the taking. Now I need you to understand the moment. You've just survived an apocalyptic earthquake. You're traumatized, terrified, probably in shock. And suddenly, there's a fortune in treasure just lying there on the exposed seafloor, maybe 50 meters away from where you're standing. Thousands of people, and I mean thousands, saw this as a gift from God, divine compensation for their suffering. They rushed down into the muddy harbor, climbing over rocks and debris, grabbing jewelry, coins, precious metals, loading their arms with wealth beyond imagination. Here's what they didn't know. When the ocean suddenly retreats like that, it's not leaving. It's loading up for a comeback. A big one. 45 minutes after the earthquake, just enough time for those treasure hunters to get really deep into the harbor. The tsunami hit. Imagine a wall of water 6 meters high, that's roughly 2 stories tall, traveling faster than a horse can gallop, funneling up the Tagus River with apocalyptic force. Eyewitness accounts say people on horseback saw it coming and literally had to gallop for their lives to reach higher ground, and many didn't make it. Every single person who had rushed into the harbor for treasure was swept away instantly. Gone. Not a single one survived. The wave crashed into the lower parts of the city with such violence that it picked up buildings like toys. It carried boats inland. It smashed through streets. Areas like Baixa and Belém were completely underwater in seconds. 2 more massive waves followed over the next 3 hours. Each one brought more destruction, more death, more chaos. And by the way, this wasn't just Lisbon's problem anymore. The tsunami traveled across the entire Atlantic Ocean, hitting Spain with 20-meter waves, reaching Morocco and killing 10,000 people there, and even making it all the way to the Caribbean, Brazil, and the coast of England. A disaster that started southwest of Portugal became a transoceanic catastrophe. But back in Lisbon, there was a third act to this tragedy that nobody saw coming. Remember all those candles? The ones lit in every church and home for All Saints' Day? When the earthquake hit, they toppled over, onto wooden floors, onto fabric decorations, onto flowers that had been drying for weeks. By the time the tsunami waves receded, fires had erupted across the city. Small flames quickly merged into what witnesses described as a firestorm, fires so intense they created their own wind patterns. The flames burned for 5 straight days. People who had survived the earthquake and dodged the tsunami were either burned alive or suffocated by smoke. By week's end, between 60,000 to 100,000 people were dead across Portugal, Spain, and Morocco. Lisbon lost roughly a third of its population. The city looked like something out of the apocalypse, smoking ruins, bodies everywhere, survivors wandering in shock through what had been, just days earlier, one of Europe's crown jewels. Now, in times of crisis, you need a leader, someone who can think clearly while everyone else is losing their minds. Enter Sebastião José de Carvalho e Melo. You probably know him better as the Marquis of Pombal, though he wouldn't get that fancy title until 15 years later. This guy was basically the prime minister, and before the earthquake, the old money aristocrats absolutely despised him. Why? Because he was basically a country squire's son who'd clawed his way to power, and they considered him an upstart nobody. The feeling was mutual. Pombal thought they were corrupt, lazy, and completely useless. But when disaster strikes, it's amazing how quickly competence beats bloodline. Legend has it that when someone asked Pombal what should be done in the immediate aftermath, he replied with possibly the most metal quote in disaster management history: "Bury the dead and heal the living." No prayers, no philosophical hand-wringing, no waiting for the church to figure out if this was God's punishment. Just cold, practical action. And boy, did he take action. First order of business: disease control. Pombal knew that thousands of rotting corpses would cause a plague that could kill more people than the earthquake itself. So he did something completely radical and absolutely heretical for Catholic Portugal. He ordered the bodies loaded onto ships and burned at sea. The church was furious. This went against every burial tradition they had. Pombal didn't care. Bodies went onto boats. Boats went out to sea. Problem solved. Next, looters. In the chaos, criminals and even escaped prisoners were ransacking the ruins, stealing from the dead, pillaging destroyed homes. Pombal's solution? He built gallows at high points throughout the city where everyone could see them. Over 30 people were publicly executed. The message was clear: loot and you die. Order was restored pretty quickly after that. Then he did something absolutely brilliant, something that would change disaster response forever. He sent out a questionnaire. Yes, a questionnaire, to every single parish in Portugal. But this wasn't your typical survey. Pombal asked very specific questions. What time did the earthquake begin? How long did it last? Did buildings fall more in one direction? How many died? Did the sea rise or fall first? How high did it rise? If fire broke out, how long did it last? Here's what's genius about this. Pombal made zero mention of God. This wasn't about divine punishment or theological meaning. He wanted facts, data, observable reality. He collected 646 responses, and they're still archived today in Torre do Tombo. This was the first time in human history that anyone had conducted a large-scale scientific study of an earthquake. Pombal basically invented modern seismology while simultaneously running disaster relief. Casual. But the real masterpiece was the reconstruction. Just 1 month after the earthquake, Chief Engineer Manuel de Maya presented 4 options: rebuild with recycled materials, widen some streets, widen more streets, or, and this was the crazy one, bulldoze the entire downtown and build a completely new city from scratch with a modern grid layout. Guess which one they picked? They chose the nuclear option. Raise it all. Start fresh. And here's where it gets really innovative. They built the world's first earthquake-resistant buildings. They constructed small wooden models and tested them by having troops march around them to simulate tremors. They created internal wooden frameworks, called pombaline cages, that would flex during earthquakes instead of crumbling. They designed wide streets and open squares. They built fire breaks between buildings. When someone asked why the streets needed to be so wide, Pombal supposedly replied, "One day they will be small." Today, Lisbon's traffic proves he was absolutely right. Here's where things get really interesting. The Lisbon earthquake didn't just destroy a city, it sparked one of the biggest philosophical debates in European history. Think about it. Portugal was one of the most devout Catholic nations on earth. And on All Saints' Day, while churches were packed with faithful worshipers, this catastrophe struck. For many survivors, this raised profound questions. Some saw it as a call to deeper faith and repentance. Others struggled to understand why such suffering would befall the innocent. It was a moment that forced everyone, from peasants to philosophers, to grapple with some of humanity's oldest questions about suffering, meaning, and divine purpose. The Jesuits in Lisbon preached that the earthquake was a divine warning, calling people to spiritual renewal and penitence. Many survivors found comfort in this explanation and threw themselves into prayer and rebuilding their religious communities. But Pombal saw things differently. He believed people needed to focus their energy on practical reconstruction rather than years of atonement. This clash between religious and secular responses created serious political tension. Enter the philosophers. Voltaire wrote his famous work, Candide, challenging the popular idea that we live in the best of all possible worlds. He asked difficult questions about suffering and divine justice that resonated across Europe. Meanwhile, Jean-Jacques Rousseau offered a different perspective. He argued that human choices made the disaster worse. People had built a dense city with tall buildings in a geologically unstable area. His point was fascinating. Perhaps natural disasters reveal not divine anger, but the consequences of our own decisions about where and how we build our communities. Immanuel Kant approached it from yet another angle, trying to understand earthquakes through natural causes, underground processes, and geological forces. He wanted to explain the mechanism without necessarily explaining away deeper meaning. What's remarkable is that these different perspectives, religious, philosophical, scientific, all pushed humanity forward in different ways. The theological wrestling led to deeper discussions about faith and suffering. The philosophical debates enriched European thought, and the scientific curiosity sparked the birth of seismology and earthquake engineering. Pombal himself demonstrated that you could embrace rational planning and scientific thinking while still being a man of his deeply Catholic culture. He used the Jesuits' political influence as a reason to expel them, but he rebuilt churches alongside civic buildings. The New Lisbon reflected Enlightenment principles of order and reason, but it remained fundamentally a city of faith. Fast forward to today, and scientists are still uncovering the earthquake's secrets. In 2025, researchers discovered that it was likely caused by something called oceanic delamination, a rare geological process involving the oceanic mantle deep underground. There's literally a blob of magma moving beneath Iberia that helps explain these earthquakes. We're still piecing together the puzzle nearly 270 years later. Modern Lisbon is a living testament to resilience. The Baixa district that Pombal rebuilt still stands with its wide, rational streets. The Carmo convent remains intentionally unrepaired, a powerful memorial with its roof open to the sky, reminding visitors of both the tragedy and the recovery. Portugal now installs seismic sensors in underwater cables, combining cutting-edge science with the historical wisdom learned from 1755. The Lisbon earthquake taught humanity that we can study natural disasters, prepare for them, and build cities that can withstand them, while still holding on to whatever deeper meanings we find in our experiences of suffering and survival. Science and faith don't have to be enemies. They can both help us understand different aspects of the human experience. November 1st, 1755, changed Portugal forever. But it also changed how humanity thinks about disaster, recovery, and the remarkable human capacity to rebuild, rethink, and carry on.